All right, my name is Alexandra and I'll be moderating today. This is Unfolding Tomorrow, a series on sustainability, bringing together education, governments and students to shape a better tomorrow. And first I'll present myself and then we present our two speakers. Start by introducing the topic of today, the end of ignorance. Ignorance as in lack of knowledge or information needed for a certain thing. So today we talk about, obviously, sustainable development. And the hosting parties of Unfolding Tomorrow is Aalto ES and Aalto Ventures program, which are two entrepreneurship entities here in Otaniemi. And for me, my name is Alexandra Brunkrona. And I'm the founder and director of Showdown Moro, short, we call it Shomo for short. And the reason why I founded Showdown Moro was that back in 2018, when I still studied here at Aalto, sustainable energy, people used to come up to me and say, you know, it's good that we have you guys so that you will fix this problem. I don't have any role in this. You know, people studying everything between law and art, and they just didn't feel that they had a role in sustainable development. And I thought that was worrying because I knew that they definitely did, that everyone has a role to play in sustainable development. And therefore I decided to, together with a lot of my friends who were definitely saying that to me, and a lot of new friends as well, create this event. It was supposed to happen for the first time in 2020, but as you all know, pandemic. So it's happening for the first time now in 2022, and the application is open now. I really urge you to apply. So short about Shomo 2022. It's happening the second weekend of May, so 1 week after Vappu. We'll have speakers, people bringing together maybe surprising fields in sustainability. So we, for example, have people who are experts in music, people who are experts in design, art, and planetary health, and so on. Then we have an ideathon, which means we'll have companies bringing their own sustainability challenges, actual challenges they have, to just show that you really do have a role to play in your careers in the future as students and soon to be in the working force. We'll have music, we have a great singer, Ingrid, and we'll have great food. And why you should apply? It's a multidisciplinary hackathon, ideathon, I'm sorry. Which obviously is a huge networking opportunity, but also a way to kind of extend your own views on sustainability. It's hybrid, so you can do it online or you can be live at Startup Sauna. It's free, so nothing to lose here really. And it's also very different. This is not gonna look like most of the hackathons or events you've been to. It's definitely not gonna look like any sustainability event you've been to. I really urge you to try this one out. All right, so moving on. First, I'll ask Minna Hallman to step on stage.
Thanks, Alexandra, for opening the event, and thank you all for inviting me here. It's great to be in the lobby of Vare talking about sustainable development, sustainable consumption, and I'll just say a few words about what I do and then a few thoughts about sustainable consumption, and then we'll talk more in the panel. So my name is Minna Hallman and I'm Professor of Sustainability Management at the Business School of Aalto. And I'm leading a research group called Sustainability in Business, and we are about 25 researchers in it, and believe it or not, it was established in 1993, first for environmental sustainability strategies issues, but since then we have broadened our research to include also the social sustainability and obviously economic sustainability questions were always there as part of it. And we do research on corporate responsibility, circular economy, sustainable innovation, sustainable business models, and so on. And a lot of that is together with researchers from other disciplines. Quite a lot of it is also international research, and we also involve companies and other organizations in many of our projects. And another thing which is really dear to me is the Creative Sustainability Master Program, which is a master program collaboration of the Department of Design at the School of Arts, Department of Management, us, at the Business School, and the School of Chemical Engineering and their sustainable materials researchers. And I was one of the co-founders before Aalto actually even started. We started testing it already, and now it is one of the most sought after programs. If you look at the numbers of how many people, how many students, how many candidates apply, and how many get accepted. And I'm also pretty entrepreneurial in other ways. I've started Aalto Global Impact. You can check later on what that is, and also I was leading 4 years Aalto Sustainability Hub, which was a university-level cross-disciplinary entity trying to integrate sustainability into research and teaching of Aalto. And eventually, I'd say that we were successful in the sense that sustainability is now at the core of the current Aalto strategy. And if I now say just a few words about like this, the consumption thematic, that's today's theme. Although most of my research is on sustainability questions in connection to business and enterprises, obviously customers and consumption are big part of that whole. Let's say so, and consumers are dependent on enterprises in terms of how sustainably they can choose what they buy, but also enterprises, companies are dependent on consumers buying sustainable services and products if they are offering those. So it's a very sort of a mutually influential relationship, and also clearly the laws and regulations and the government side of it, which Harri will tell to you about later on, is very important in sort of setting the incentives for businesses doing the right thing, and also in helping out consumers to do the right thing. And we often think of sort of, let's say, some consumers being like the green consumers, some sort of not so green, and some slightly green, and there are all sorts of categorizations. But actually what is much more true is that whether we make sustainable consumption decisions or not depends on how easy it is in terms of price, in terms of accessibility, our access to sustainable goods and services, or the easiness of information that is available. It's also very dependent on whether we actually trust that the companies say the true things, and whether we believe that the product or service that we are buying actually has an influence on sustainability. And also there are really different consumption categories in terms of how much an individual consumer can influence to the purchasing decision. If you think of, let's say, how your house is heated up, or the mobility options, you can't use public transportation if it's not available. And if you live in an apartment building, it's very difficult for you to choose solar power and so on. But then if you talk about food, or if you talk about clothing, those are consumption categories where you actually can influence a lot. If you are sufficient, if you have the sufficient knowledge and in a way almost expertise to really know like what kind of ecological footprint your consumption choices have. But I think that I'll finish up here, and then we'll talk more in the discussion in the panel, and I'll be happy to continue then. And also, please try thinking of difficult questions to answer, or not necessarily difficult, but questions that are in your minds, and that you sort of feel that this is really challenging, and what can be done about it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Minna, and thank you, Alexandra, for excellent introductions. I especially liked what Alexandra said about how building a more sustainable future is really a task for everybody and not just the specialist. And I feel that's very true. It's not only and we spoke a bit before the show here with Minna about that this is something that all of us, whether we work in government or academia or industry, we have to keep this in mind, whether we are specialists or generalists. So, a bit about myself. My name is Harri Paananen. I'm the director in charge of economic development at the city of Espoo. So I represent the point of view of municipal government here. Not state level, that's important distinctions because we don't have the power to make laws, but the kind of ground level government perspective on sustainability. And I myself am actually a triple Aalto alumnus. I originally did my master's as what was first called the Helsinki School of Economics, and later it transformed before I graduated into the Aalto School of Business. Later I did my doctorate at the Aalto School of Science at the Department of Industrial Engineering and Management, SimLab, if you're familiar with that place. And then most recently I did my EMBA at Aalto Executive Education and did an excellent course also with Minna, which makes this all the more daunting because it's kind of like an oral test now. I have to present about a topic where I'm a dilettante and the professor is listening, so that's kind of scary. Well, if I try to break this into little pieces, this topic of sustainability, if I usually think about things from the point of view, what does a word mean? Sustainable to me first means that a process is able to sustain itself in the long run. From the city's point of view, will we be able to provide high quality life and high quality services for our residents in the future as well, not just today, but in the future? For a business, is a business viable also in a number of years? And from the environment's point of view, are we living in our physical world in a way which allows for life also in the future? And these are kind of the perspectives the city takes to sustainability as well. We, of course, are adhering to the SDGs, and we are looking at sustainability from various different angles. So social sustainability, economic sustainability, and ecological sustainability, which are often interlinked. And social sustainability for the city would mean, in terms of action, for example, preventing segregation, providing education, health services, safety in general, those kind of things that build well-being in society and which maintain cohesion, trust, social capital. So the city is active in these senses in many factors. In terms of ecological sustainability, maybe the most direct action that the city takes is to build infrastructure. And hence, the city is an enabler for an ecological lifestyle for others as well. So if we build public transport, it's more easy to live in an ecological fashion than if we only built highways in a very kind of accentuated sense. But it's also how we build. So for example, I just read like 2 minutes before I came here an article that Espoo is undertaking a a new way to procure infrastructure by setting these terms for construction projects to use certain low emission tools and battery driven tools instead of diesel, for example. So we can, through public procurement, affect how infrastructure is constructed. So the city has a big enabler role, and as a big customer, in a sense, as a big procurement of services, we can set requirements for the supply chain, and that way, in fact, affect the environment. Lastly, if we talk about economic sustainability, well, this is kind of a catchphrase that is used by a lot of different types of actors with different types of agendas, but I think many people, when they say economic sustainability, they mean frugality and very low public spending. Now, this is the part where my private thinking starts and the public thinking ends, but I don't think it necessarily needs to mean that. I think the city could take a more kind of progressive view on what is economic sustainability and public actors in general. We have business services that you might have encountered through Business Espoo, which is our free business service platform. And in one of those services, we provide advice for aspiring entrepreneurs. And when we talk to those entrepreneurs about their business models, we ensure that they are viable, they are sustainable, that you will be able to make a living with this business model also in 5 years and not just for a few months when you have a grant. And this is, we feel, it's responsible and it's sustainable on the very base level. But I think we could be more ambitious and try to actively open up avenues of kind of promoting business that is sustainable in the more wider sense, also ecologically and socially. I think we have a ways to go there. But I'm happy to see that in the local Otaniemi startup community, especially with Aalto, that mindset is already there and has been for a while. I think young entrepreneurs like you have a different mindset, and when you think of entrepreneurship, it's not only about how to make a quick exit and a few million very quickly. I think many of you are thinking also how do I want to impact the world, and that is something I'm really happy to see, because to be fair, I think the world and the city needs actors like this. But perhaps I'll end my part here, and we can move on to the panel. So thank you very much. Happy to talk with you.
All right, thank you for your presentations, Harri and Minna, and welcome to this panel discussion. So we'll begin by some questions that I have for the panelists, and then I'll ask the audience for questions as well. So do have that in mind and think of good questions to ask later. So my first question was going to be what sustainability means to you, but you already quite eloquently answered that, Harri. So maybe Minna wants to take over.
Yeah, thank you. For me, it indeed means the connection of ecological, social, and economic sustainability, and actually in such a way that the Earth is what we have to live on. So that is the biggest, constraint. And at the moment, the livability of the Earth is at threat. So that's kind of the boundary condition. And then on this Earth, we should have such societies that there isn't overly big economic inequality between the people, so that the societies stay cohesive, so that some large parts are not completely left behind in terms of fulfilling their basic needs. Plus, I would say, I see also health and education as sort of needs that should be fulfilled. And then the economy is something that we need to keep up good societies. So in a way, instead of, some of you might have seen those 3 balls where, or those circles which intersect at one point, and that is what you are going toward. I see it so that the environment is the most important one, then societies are in it and economy needs to run in such a way that it keeps up good society and helps us staying within the planetary boundaries.
Thank you.
May I add something?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Minna made an excellent point about economic, that the differences in economic well-being would not be too high. And I think we are seeing excellent examples of how when they are too high, focus starts to drift to very outlandish projects like living forever or going to Mars. Because, like you said, it's only this planet, and Mars is not really a viable option, despite what Elon Musk thinks. So I think it's good to focus on what we have.
Thank you. So I think we all agree that sustainability is important, but whose responsibility is it that people are aware of sustainable development concepts and how to change their own lifestyles, how to impact? If you want to start, Harri?
Well, from a government perspective, the government has a big role in that through education. So we see already that the younger generations are more aware of this issue than previous generations, and this has a lot to do with what the curriculums are, what are the base understandings are that are imprinted on people. What do they have to start with? And there's wide differences between different countries of how well young people understand this issue. Although I would say that everywhere in the world, the young people understand this better than the older generations. I think there's been too much of a focus on individual responsibility. And I think it's a hoax in a sense to make us believe that the individual consumer is the one who determines by themselves. Of course, there's an impact on consumer pressure for sure, but I think it's the responsibility of lawmakers and government to devise regulation that also forces and incentivizes sustainable lifestyles and sustainable behaviors, and puts checks and balances on organizations that do not adhere to these. I think the EU is much better than most of the world in this. We have actual regulatory power that is driving to that direction. If you compare to North America, the public institutions that oversee this kind of things are very, very weak. They don't have the staff to actively monitor who is behaving properly and who is not, and they don't have the power to properly sanction those who have broken the rules. So effectively, I don't think the governments in North America, for example, are doing as much as they could. So the government does have a big role, and I think this is something then from the individual point of view that we have to remember as voters and activists, that we have to put pressure on the lawmakers to make these kind of decisions.
So in a way, it's also something an individual can impact.
Absolutely. I'm not saying one cannot. Everyone can, but I'm saying that the public discourse for a long time has been such that it kind of puts all the weight on the individual instead of the institution.
Thank you. Minna?
Yeah, to continue from what Harri said, because I share your view. I think this is kind of a boring answer, but everybody's responsibility, government's responsibility in the way that Harri was explaining, but also big responsibility for business, for what kind of products and what kind of services throughout the physical life cycles of those products and services they are offering to us as citizens and consumers. And there is a lot of knowledge and a lot of financial muscle within enterprises. So they have a big responsibility as well, because always with big resources comes big responsibility. And consumers also have to play their part in the sense that when you are able to choose sustainably, then you should do it if you care for sustainability. Because as I said in my opening speech, companies also need the response in terms of the profits that they get, the ones that are offering the sustainable products or services. If consumers don't care, if they don't buy, then those companies won't live that that are offering the better solutions. So all of these entities are important, and also the civil society. Different types of non-governmental organizations are much needed in terms of either more radically trying to change opinions, like now the Extinction Rebellion, for instance, or very peaceful grassroots civil society organizations that are, for instance, organizing courses for people to learn how to mend their clothes or cook vegetarian food or things like that. So it's really, I see it very much as an interplay of different sectors in the society.
I often hear people say that they would like to live sustainably, but that it's very complex and they feel like there's a lot of wrong information out there. How can we solve this, and what is it to live sustainably? Would you like to continue?
Yeah, this is really, this is a really big issue, because first of all, sustainability is a complex, multifaceted thing. Environmental questions are many, also social questions are many, and then there is the economic aspects. And you think of climate change, you think of biodiversity, you think of various types of water pollution, air pollution, and so on, and then you are trying to weigh. So very, very tricky. And then the thing is that much of the information that come from companies is in very complex form. Like their sustainability reports are more for researchers or financial analysts or other experts to use. And then you have different types of labels, some of which are reliable, like Nordic Swan would be a reliable label on a product. So you would know that, okay, this is more environmentally benign than a number of other products that don't have that label. But then you also have these kind of, very relaxed labels. And then you have the free form speech and text from companies, and one almost needs to be an expert. But I'd say that, or my advice would be that try to develop for yourselves certain rules of thumb, like usually choosing relatively local vegetarian food is better than exotic stuff and red meat, for instance. Or using anything longer, having it repaired, is usually more sustainable than buying new when something breaks or when you just feel like having something new. And buying used something or sharing, using sharing services and so on. So kind of trying to start from not becoming an expert immediately or not becoming cynical when you are, under this information flow, but rather starting from somewhere. And then little by little, you realize that actually your level of knowledge is improving. And I think that the most easiest thing is really to think very carefully, do I need to buy a new something?
And if I'll rephrase the question a little bit for you, Harri. So you said that we should all put pressure on decision makers. This is once again very complex. If you're not a sustainability expert, you might not know what you want to pressure them to do at all. How do we solve this?
Well, I think, if I remember correctly, somewhere around the 90s, there was this trend of talking that we need education for financial literacy for people after the depression of the 90s. So people would be able to spot when they're trying to be cheated by loan sharks or bad deals or credit systems that would actually make them financially worse off. And I think we kind of require a similar movement for sustainability literacy. So people would have better basic skills to assess for themselves to be able to create these kind of rules of thumb, which I think is an excellent idea, because if you have a rule of thumb or a routine for decision making, then you won't have to make these decisions again every day for many times, which is really emotionally and mentally taxing, and you're not likely to kind of keep up with a good routine. So I think maybe education plus this routine building sounds like a good idea.
Nice. So do you see any other obstacles in terms of green or sustainable consumption than just the complexity of it and or raising awareness?
I think a big issue, if I may, is vested interests. There's a lot of actors that have a vested interest in keeping the system as it is. And a lot of those actors are very, very powerful, and they are willing to put a lot of resources into disinformation campaigns, public lobbying, to keep us doing everything as we have. If we want to take an example of the past decades, we can think about what the tobacco industry did for decades and how they affected public opinion through popular culture, through lobbying, and basically cheated the world for a long, long time. And I think we have seen something similar with sustainability in the past. And now we are perhaps in a stage where it's been realized that battle has been lost, so you cannot really actively advocate against sustainability anymore. But then you can do greenwashing, such as the cigarette industry did with the menthol cigarettes. So I think that it's a matter of power, I think, and that there are people who are benefiting from the unsustainable lifestyle of current. Plus, there's such a thing as human habit and culture. We're really bad as simple apes to change our ways, and it's mentally taxing to start doing things differently. So I think that's the personal level.
Yeah, very, very good points. Very good points. And I would say that that there are still so many business models that are relying on selling more constantly, instead of business models which are helping us in leading sustainable lives. And this is something that makes it much harder for us consumers who would like to, do better than if we'd have a lot of alternatives, which are kind of, helping us to lead nice lives, fulfill our needs without having to buy so much stuff so often. And this is really where, if I think of you as young people and as entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs, I think there is a lot to do. And then at the, let's say, more macro level, this ideology and, in a way, system that we have created, which is so dependent on having our gross domestic product growing, and us believing that this is creating better lives for us, instead of having a measurement system which would be more like responding to contemporary problems, which is taking into account the economic part, the environmental part, and the social well-being. So we should start counting the success of our nations and nations in general with something else than the gross domestic product, GDP. I have nothing against that being calculated, but I have a lot against it being used as a measure of well-being, because basically the more we create higher GDPs, we are actually doing it at the cost of environment. And this is just because it's calculated the way it's calculated. And it's a really old measure. We have much better options.
Can I add something? I agree 100%, and it's pretty much what I wanted to say as well. It's a warped understanding of what well-being is, and it trickles down from the macro level, as you described, to the individual level, where even policymakers equate well-being to income levels, or how much what's your purchasing power parity. So how much stuff can you buy? How much stuff can you buy? Not the quality of the stuff. So they're looking at, for example, at how many TVs could a person have bought in 1970 and now, and they're not taking into account that maybe the quality of the TV has gotten better, but it's just the amount that is being. And I think it's a kind of warped idea for us as well, that if someone say, it's even the word in Finnish, we talk about hyvinvointi, is well-being, is actually often equated to material well-being. How much objects can you acquire? And I think that's a very simplistic perspective on how well you are doing. So it's a cultural, micro-level issue as well.
So essentially we're looked into a bad system and we need to change it. And one way is through awareness and education. So switching subjects quite drastically, what can startups do here?
Well, you can create those new business models that don't exist yet, or where the offering is limited, or scale up ideas that are existing but not very viable because of the cost, for example, to many people. And I think it's what you described, for example, that we are used to buying a lot of clothes. We are not, for example, we are not used to getting them repaired. And well, I was just introduced a while ago to a business model where actually a very experienced fashion designer launched their own new brand, which was entirely focused on the repairability of their clothing. And they even had this kind of contract model with the client where they can have a kind of a service contract like you would have for a car, but for the piece of clothing. So the idea is that it will last for decades instead of maybe months. And this is what we need in all areas of life, I think.
Yeah, indeed. I couldn't agree more. I think the biggest things that startups can do is to create business models that are environmentally and from the social perspective very sound. And of course, they have to be economically profitable. But setting up these two other goals aside of the financial goal, and then thinking of how can we, what can a startup offer such that creates well-being for the users of its service or products, and at the same time puts the environmental footprint lower than what a competitor is doing, or offers social well-being for that is better, or offers that for those who at the moment have it worse, have it bad.
And those new business models can be also on the business-to-business front, and they can be something that are not even framed as a sustainability solution. So, for example, and this was definitely not, but something like 15 years ago, Kone Cranes, the crane developer, Finnish crane developer, they shifted their strategy from trying to sell very simplistically, from building and selling a lot of expensive cranes to actually leasing the cranes and then charging for maintenance and having an IoT solution that predicts kind of wear and tear, hence enhancing the lifetime operability of the crane by a lot of time. And this was very good for the customer. They got a more operational, safer crane for a longer time, but actually, and they got a lot of kind of more work out of it. But Kone Cranes also made a better profit through this model. The profit just came from the maintenance side more than the actual selling of the crane. And it was never, when Pekka Lundmark introduced this model, he never spoke about sustainability, but I think in fact this is a very sustainable and smart solution.
And just to mention one more example, if you think of Swappy, how they prolong the lives of iPhones, which have actually been made to break more quickly, so that you would have to quickly buy new ones. That's actually also, like, I don't think that the Swappy guys were actually thinking in sustainability terms, but actually what they managed to create is lower footprint of Apple iPhones in total, because they are prolonging the lives of the existing ones. So anything that prolongs the lives of the existing stock of products out there in the market is great.
So circular economy is a thumbs up.
Absolutely, and even though we just discounted GDP as a measure, but these kind of models show also that being sustainable doesn't mean that the GDP will dive. You can maintain growth if you do it in a smarter way. That just means that there's less physical materials and emissions.
How about social sustainability and startups?
Yeah, that's also an area where a lot can be done. What I think, though, is that these kind of super examples like Kone moving over to leasing and servicing models or Swappy, the sort of let's say real quick growth models are a bit less possible. That can happen, but it's not so obvious because these sort of saving materials and energy and this whole idea of circularity doesn't work exactly with the same type of logic. But there is a lot that startups can do in the area of social sustainability. But I also want to say here that in countries that have a lot of gaps in terms of the social services, I mean that there are many people in need. Like in the UK, they tore down a lot of the welfare services starting from the 1980s. US is another example, and many developing countries are an example also of where there are a lot of like social enterprises that are responding to the problems of social sustainability. And it's okay in countries where you have such problems that enterprises are there, but I actually think that it's more efficient if you have a good public sector in an uncorrupt country to have a lot of those, let's say, health, infrastructure and educational services being provided by the public sector. If only we compare like how much healthcare costs in the US and how little they get with it overall with the system in the Nordic countries or in Germany, the Netherlands, we can see that it is inefficient. So therefore, I wouldn't want to promote the idea that, okay, yes, let's have enterprises and startups providing all sorts of social services, and that's gonna sort of, make the society better off. But with this kind of, let's say, boundary condition, I would say that there are a lot of things that that startups can think of in terms of, having an impact, a social sustainability impact.
I agree in the sense that companies and startups can best work in the realm of social responsibility or sustainability as partners to the public sector. But I agree they cannot take up all the roles, especially when we're talking about the very most vulnerable groups of people, like very young people, disabled or elderly. I think there's a big role for the public sector always, but innovation to those sectors through technology solutions or better operating models is definitely something that often must come from the side of the private sector or startups, simply because the way the public sector is constructed, for example, in Finland, is so that it's very lean. Despite what some people say, it's very lean, and most of the resources are going to do the work as efficiently as possible, to provide the legally bound services as efficiently as possible, which means there's not a whole lot of mental or fiscal resources for innovating. It's simply because people don't have the time for that. And seeing if that doesn't change, we will need private sector partners to help us. Of course, then there's a question that, is this a good model to fund public services where people don't have time to think? But it's a different question.
So sustainable startups can impact the government in a way. Can sustainable startups impact big businesses, traditional businesses?
Yes, they can. And not only in sustainability, but in innovation in general. A lot of big corporations nowadays don't really innovate that much. They buy up innovative startups to buy innovativeness or sustainability. And definitely this is, it's a kind of Trojan horse system nowadays. So yes, definitely.
Yeah, it's actually fun to see sometimes how much the corporate people enjoy working with startups in partnerships, for instance, because the frameworks for innovation in large corporations are really strict, and it's very, very difficult in a way to innovate also in them, as strange as this sounds. So I think that in this sense also, the innovations, in a way, the most of it would have to come from the startups, and then these different types of partnerships with the corporations are a good way to go.
Okay. So in terms of awareness and ignorance, as is our topic today, I had a question, but I forgot it. What role do you play as a professional, say, for example, working in a big company? What role can you play there? What kind of awareness what do you need to be aware of, basically?
A very good question. And sustainability is actually an area where we need to educate ourselves, and where people who are working in corporations also need to learn. It's not just like having a right attitude thing. A right attitude is, okay, good. If you realize that these are big problems, we should do something. That's like the first step. But then a lot of the environmental questions, and also understanding how let's say the socioeconomics hangs together as a system, is something that is a matter of knowledge. It's not just a matter of having a good attitude. So in that sense, the concept that Harri, you used earlier, this financial literacy, that we should have much more sustainability literacy. And the good thing is that many corporations have realized this, and they are having their people educated in different places. And we are seeing this actually as a big pressure, because they would need much more sooner solutions for many more people than we are able to provide at the moment. I was going to say something else as well, but now that slipped my mind.
I agree, and I think if people in corporations, startups, or government have more this holistic understanding of sustainability, they'll be able to devise this kind of game-changing kind of innovations that are very marketable and very, very scalable and highly impactful. For example, like a recent example from Espoo is something that's, I think, in its scale, the largest in the world. Maybe you heard about a month ago there was news that there was the biggest ICT investment in Finland, which was the new data center of Microsoft, which was linked to the district heating system of Fortum and the city of Espoo. So basically, of course, there's a basic problem with data centers and use of excess data, that they provide a lot of excess heat, kind of goes to waste. But now that it's will be linked to the district heating system of Espoo, we'll actually be able to provide heating for 40% of the population of this city and 2 of the smaller neighboring cities when it's done. So kind of that's showing how, if you understand the financial and economic aspects of sustainability, you can create these solutions that attack the wicked problems.
All right. So in terms of sustainability and awareness of sustainability, do you think there are areas that kind of get forgotten? Do people associate sustainability with, for example, social sustainability? Or is there always this kind of green tag there?
I think it depends very much on who one is talking about. And after taking some, basic courses, which are reasonably good, I think that the connection of the three should be quite clear. But of course, it's quite true that if you have, let's say, an engineering education, you tend to focus on the environment economic aspect more, and you have more knowledge of that probably. Whereas if you have an education which is more on the side of social sustainability, that is what you tend to emphasize more. So we can see those, let's say, I wouldn't want to say biases, but sort of more knowledge on one side of sustainability. And I don't see that as a problem. It's kind of, it sort of makes sense because of these expertise backgrounds. But what we've already said before about this kind of developing our systemic understanding of things is very important for sustainability. And it doesn't have to be very complex, but just understanding that solving one thing is not solving everything, and that solving one thing doesn't necessarily mean that all the other sustainability areas get solved at the same time, that there are also these trade-off situations between different parts of sustainability sometimes, which I think is actually really interesting for innovation. Because when you are trying to perfect your solution from a number of environmental respects and also think of, okay, what kind of social sustainability tweaks should we probably consider in order to make it best possible, that is when you actually can, get to an innovation which can be a winner eventually. So for me, this is like, I think it's a super opportunity at the same time as it is a difficulty if you are just sort of, too focused on one aspect.
Definitely, and not only the effects of impacting one type of sustainability and another, but also within, for example, environmental sustainability. For example, I'm kind of on the fence whether I'm not doing a good thing or not. I'm going to get my first electric car, so which is great, less emissions, but the battery has probably been made of something that's destroyed a local environment somewhere else. So in the end, I'm not really sure if it's such a great thing in the total picture. As to the original question, I think there's much wider public cohesion on what is environmental sustainability. That it means low emissions or using resources less. But I think there's more ambiguity among the public discourse on what is social sustainability and what is economic sustainability. I think it's these are loaded concepts, and I don't think people agree at all as much on what those mean than the former, because for some economic sustainability might mean frugality, and for another it might mean the low income differences, or social sustainability as well. There's very many, even more value-based differences in what people understand there. So I think there's probably needs to be a lot more public discourses on those.
I actually often hear that sustainability is a very vague term. Do you agree with this?
It's multifaceted and it's complex. It's not vague at all. I think it's really about how we keep the world, the earth, livable for the current and for the future generations. I think it's really, really totally not vague.
I agree. It's not vague, it's complex. And maybe the complexity is what makes it feel vague for people or difficult to understand. But I think if you think about it from the point of view of what was just said, I think it becomes more simple. You can kind of bring all paths to that end conclusion and see if what you're doing is sustainable or not.
Should we simplify a complex concept like sustainability to make it more easy maybe for most people to understand?
You can go ahead first.
maybe as the layman, I'd say, yeah, maybe the discussion is sometimes a bit academic, and it would help to bring it more to the kind of everyday level. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a very fun question to me, or a good question, because just before Easter, I'm leading a large sustainable textile systems project, which has 9 different disciplines, 30 researchers in it, and we work a lot together with companies and other some NGOs in it. And I was writing this message based on we had a had just had a meeting on data and digitalization as an enabler for some sustainable solutions and business models in the area of textile systems. And I wrote this email to all of them after the seminar that I realized that one of the next things that we should go for is actually science-based simplifications on the textile things that we are doing. I don't start explaining that now, but we now have this little like a sub-mission for ourselves, which is this science-based simplification, and we've already done a couple of that types of things. If some of you want to check, you can check #kestävä vaate. That is kind of a simple criteria for like we screened companies on the basis of whether they are have circularity in their offering or longevity. And we actually have over 100 small Finnish textile companies on that list. That's one example, and another one is what we call Shades of Green for Fashion instrument. But those are like 2 instruments. But now we have this science-based simplification as a kind of a goal, and I think it is really, really necessary because of the complexity of the concept, and you can never sort of have like larger impact if things remain such that only experts and researchers understand what this is about. So simplification, but not simplifications which is like you have this one criteria, like let's say CO2 emissions only, but it should be somewhat more comprehensive, and it depends like which category of consumption/production you are talking about. So it can't be like the same simplification for all, but definite yes.
Were there any challenges in these efforts that you noticed when simplifying?
Yes, and those challenges come especially from the side of the research community and from the side of experts who are very knowledgeable about something. And it's almost unbearable for some to digest simplified information that is coming from the academia.
So is simplification a way to kind of battle the misinformation and disinformation out there, or do we need to do something else?
I think we need to do something else about those as well. So maybe that's a partial solution to it, but disinformation and misinformation are really big phenomena, which need a lot different kinds of efforts.
Who is responsible of tackling misinformation and disinformation, such as greenwashing and pinkwashing and whitewashing?
I think we've already established that it's everybody. But of course, again, from the kind of public side, there is a responsibility to regulate. If you don't require certain activities or transparencies through law regulation, then probably only a fraction of companies will adhere to the good practices. Unfortunately, like large international companies are limited liability companies. They are publicly owned by such a wide base that there's basically no vision from the ownership to the active management, this means that the leadership is incentivized to maximize the shareholder profit in the short term, in the current system. So if you don't have regulations to stop, probably most won't be incentivized to truly adhere to these good practices.
And of course also here we can see some role for startups that are offering services which are helping out there. For instance, this Upright project is one example that is actually trying to do it. And I'm not saying that it's a perfect solution, but that's sort of one of the solutions out there, which is kind of having that starting point and creating something. And then there is this interesting in the area of chemicals in cosmetics. I don't remember now how it is called, but it's this Finnish woman who created a larger movement. It's not really an enterprise, but it's basically trying to, reveal what kind of chemicals there are in cosmetics and what it means when you see this and this in your shampoo or cream or some makeup, so that people want to understand what they are actually buying and what that does to you, that chemical, or what it does to the environment. So these kind of things sort of, again, maybe in a way, in the interpretational simplification types of services could be one way of tackling this. And just for the sake of clarity, I would actually like to say that greenwashing is one thing, and then this misinformation and disinformation is a little bit different still. That I wouldn't put them all in the same basket, although there might be some sort of common elements. But I see mis and disinformation as like a level more serious even than the greenwashing by companies.
Would you say that, and this is my last question, would you say that part of raising awareness for these kind of sustainability issues is to educate the educated on how to share their solutions and ideas?
Yeah, I think so, and I think Aalto University is a front runner in that in general, because I think there is this university is impact driven and takes focus also to educate researchers, I think, to some extent. And I think it's a similar model, because then, the university, as I understand it, is striving to create more innovation from research. And a big part of that is to help the researchers understand what is their research value to society or business, and then they have to translate and communicate it better. I think the similar logic can be applied to communicating sustainability.
Yeah, it's I very much agree, and actually I just have to share this little example with you. I teach a course which is called How to Change the World, Innovating Towards Sustainability. And as one part of it, the students in teams develop a sustainable business model for a startup. And one of these was Transpiracy. They called the company Transpiracy. And what they were doing in the sketched model was that they were exactly trying to tackle the greenwashing and untransparency problem that there is by the products of companies. And with a crowdsourcing financial model and connecting with researchers, I won't explain the details, but they were actually very good with the details as well. But they created this model where you could sort of drive companies toward bigger transparency by sort of exposing them to researchers who are knowledgeable about certain areas, providing the data and information about the companies after the companies had first been sort of asked, do you want to answer yourself? And then this crowdsourcing of like, which are the questions regarding which companies that the most consumers want to pay for. And then they would sort of, find the researchers who will start digging into that question if the company itself is not giving the answer. It was really, really nice. I would very much like to see that, out there in practice.
So before we move on to the audience's questions, do you have any questions for each other?
I think we can go to the audiences so that they can also...
Yeah. All right, so this works like this, that you don't get a mic, but I'll repeat whatever you ask into this mic so that we get it on tape as well. That means that if I repeat it wrong, definitely correct me. So if you have a question, just stand up and speak very clearly so I can hear you. So the question is essentially that can consumers' decisions and political decisions be combined?
Really good question. I would actually like to see that happening, but I can't immediately, think of the solution of how that would happen. So now I would only give this kind of, abstract level, sounds good.
Yeah, me too. I can think of one example which is kind of an attempt in that direction. I don't think it's a successful one, but in a sense what that very small party in Finland, Liike Nyt, is claiming to do is they're claiming to subject all decision making to their voters, or not even to their voters or anybody who's on their platform. So basically they're saying you can behave like a consumer on the party platform and say what they should vote on each little issue. What that then does, unfortunately, is that the party kind of doesn't have any kind of agenda. So if it's just like a Iltalehti poll at that point, because it also doesn't take into account who's voting and whatever. But yeah, that's an interesting concept. I don't have an answer for it, though. I think I'd be much more successful if I did.
Thank you. Any other questions? How to benchmark sustainability?
Yes. There are actually many ways of measuring sustainability. Be it processes in terms of, like, let's say, energy consumption, emissions, and so on. And there are also ways of measuring product life cycles, that are coming through the processes, through manufacturing processes. So actually I think that even though this sounds kind of strange, but I don't think that there is a lot of measuring going on. The question is more like, how do we get all that measuring impacting on decision making at the company level and also at the level of consumer decision making. So this is exactly the kind of question, that is interesting from the perspective of, or it sort of ties back to what we said previously, that sustainability is an area of knowledge and of learning and sort of, going to taking courses and so on. And once one takes a few, you realize that, oh my God, there are so many measuring instruments, and there is so much data available already that it's kind of almost like surprising that more of it is not coming to our everyday decision-making use better.
Maybe it's a matter of kind of analysis paralysis as well, because there's so much information and people have such a kind of a low basic understanding So you kind of freeze in front of all of it, which brings us back to the simplification that you asked earlier.
Thank you. Another question, yes? So in terms of ethical consumerism, the ethical choice is usually more expensive. And do you have comments and thoughts on that?
I think that in the end, most sustainable products or services are actually more affordable in the long run, because most of these are expensive now because they're new and they don't have economies of scale. For example, plant-based protein like nyhtökaura or härkäpapu, they're not like produced en masse yet. They're quite niche products, and they're more expensive because of that. Also, they have quite a lot of branding to do, so they probably put money into marketing to get the product out there. But once more people buy it, and more is produced, it's also cheaper because, well, simply it's not consumed by enough people yet. And plant-based protein is much cheaper to produce than meat, really. Meat is really expensive and resource intensive to produce. But also there's the matter of subsidies. There's a lot of subsidies to produce meat. And if governments would not subsidize production of meat, it would not be affordable. We are paying way too little for meat currently, which makes the false idea that it's cheap, which is not. The incentives could be reversed, and suddenly overnight the situation would be changed. Similarly, for electric cars, they're quite new. The technology is new, but once the technology and the production processes are improved, there will also be more affordable. And again, there we come to subsidizing. So it's very important for governments nowadays to keep gas prices low, because otherwise people will start wearing yellow vests and burning cars. But if we manage to change that mindset and like electric car use infrastructure is better and their production facilities are more advanced, then electric car use will be more affordable as well. It's already more affordable to drive electric car than gas drive car. But like when electric cars are more ubiquitous, they will also become cheaper. Also, there's really almost no electric cars on the second-hand market yet because they're so new. So it'll change, I think.
Yeah, and totally agree. And what's very irritating are actually these subsidies to meat products especially. But not all sustainable choices are more expensive. So for instance, if you buy used furniture, used clothing, used whatever, that's cheaper. And you have a lot of good stuff around there. If you use longer, that's also not more expensive. It's actually cheaper. So very often we have to kind of just work around this sort of status symbolism or impulse buying of something new. And then there are those, unfortunate, like organic food costing more than industrially produced fertilizer-grown food and so on. But I always say that there is also this frugal way of consuming sustainably. But then it requires that one sort of gives up of some of the status symbolistic part of our lifestyles. Although now I must say that what I've observing around amongst at least young women, like around 20, below 20 and 20 something, is the sort of trendiness of second-hand clothing and sort of vintage items clothing. I think it's not like sort of a main trend, but it's definitely no longer a marginal thing either. You see much more of the kind of brand type of second-hand stores around, as well as in the web market area. So if you start sort of finding those instances where you could make the less expensive choice when it's sustainable. That would kind of also probably routinize in a while. Harri was using this very good concept of building a routine of something.
Definitely, and I think you're absolutely right that these perceptions of status are changing. But we also really see different perceptions of status in different countries. Like here, in the capital region of Finland, you probably, eating vegan food is something that can bring you high status. And in another area, more rural or another country, can bring you low status. So these change, but they can change quite quickly. Also, final note on kind of what's affordable, what not. To be honest, maybe my road to a more sustainable lifestyle, which is very much ongoing still, started with me being super, super frugal, or let's be honest, cheap. So when I was a student, I didn't have much money. I wanted to save money, so I was actually buying mostly second-hand furniture, second-hand clothing, buying from supermarkets when they were closing time, discounts, almost expiring proteins and whatever, and stocking in the fridge. So for me, actually, it started with being, trying to be getting affordable products, and it doesn't have to be about paying more necessarily.
And on that very positive note, I am sorry to say we are already over time, so I won't be taking any more questions. I'd like to thank our speakers today. It's been a really interesting discussion, thus the overtime. And I can already see there are some pizzas back there, so we'll let the audience go and have their dinner. But yeah, big applause to our speakers.
Thanks, everybody. It was the most fun I've had in a panel in a long time, so thank you.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, Alexandra, and thank you, everybody. It was very nice being here.
Joo.